So, East India Youth. Do you mind if I call you Will for the
No,
interview?
you can call me Will. It'd be better than calling me East India Youth for the whole thing.
Well, it was going to be awkward because I was thinking, do I call him Will or East?
East, yeah.
Kind of a problem. But so this is charmoffensive.ee. It's and I'm Stuart Garlick, and I'm here with Will, as in East India Youth. So very nice to meet you, Will. First of all, the name East India Youth, I know came from the area of London where you were. But it also comes from the place where you used to live, which you called the Youth Hostel. Is that
Yeah,
right?
so East India is in the Docklands in London, and we used to call the flat the Youth Hostel that we used to live in, because there was always like a revolving door of people staying there at any one time for a period, at least anyway. It seemed like, one weekend there'd be someone else here, and you wake up in the morning and there'd be someone sleeping on the sofa here or here, and it's like, I think I paint the picture of it being this sort of endless party, but I don't know if it quite was that exciting. But it felt like an important place in my life, and I've lived there till recently anyway. So yeah.
And you said before that youth symbolised your creative rebirth at the time when you were making the first album, but I mean, how much of that comes from the environment you were in at the time?
A lot, I think. There was a feeling of a change. I moved to London from Southampton, and yeah, it was a big cultural shock, I suppose, in that sense. There was a lot more going on in London than there was down in Southampton, and that kind of influenced the music in some way. So that place felt symbolic of it in some way. That was just where I was writing and recording songs, So, and always my environment's sort of like the biggest influence on me. So, yeah.
I think it's the same for everyone, really, isn't it? But you were in a band before you went solo, if you like.
Well, I was in a lot of bands.
Right, yeah. But the band I've read about is actually the one with your name in the title.
Yeah.
How do you think the creative processes differ? I mean, obviously you've got more people involved, but how does that change the music that comes out of it in the end?
I don't know, because it depended. I was working with some amazing people. Ben, our guitar player, is still one of the best musicians I've ever met. So the arrangements that would eventually come out would be very detailed and interesting. But I think it's only as much as the people that you're working with, really. And I was able to take my ideas to their logical conclusion with my stuff I was doing by myself, which became East India Youth, and that felt to me at the time more fulfilling, just because it felt like I needed to express myself in a certain way, that being one member of a band only let me do a certain amount of, really. So with East India Youth, it was like I've got control over all of the aspects.
So you didn't find the whole creative process of being completely on your own isolating. You found it actually empowering.
Well, no, because that's the way I started to work when I was a teenager. Anyway, when I was about 14, I started to record music on the computer, and from there, that was just the way I got used to working. Really, being in bands was kind of a detour in a sense. So I feel more comfortable working in this way, and I have done for the last sort of 10, 11 years.
Yeah. I heard you speaking earlier about how you always think about the sweep of the album. You always think about how everything sounds together.
Absolutely.
But Total Strife Forever sounds to me like a mix of many, many different styles. Was that really the case? Were you thinking of a broad sweep there, or were you just trying to experiment there a bit?
Well, I think what I meant by is the arc of the record and how it moves from one place to the next, and I think that only happens because of the different styles of music that are involved there. I had no real interest in making something that was consistent sonically, but did have a cohesive thread running through it. That's kind of the challenge. I think both albums I've tried to do that now. So yeah, I think that stuff comes very naturally to me at the same time. It feels like for years now that every song I've made, the one before it was sounding completely different to the one next to it, so on.
Yeah, and Culture of Volume is totally different to Total Strife Forever.
Exactly.
But I've read reviews and thoughts from music writers where they say that it sounds like you tried to make a mainstream record and somewhere along the line you didn't manage to make a mainstream record. Were you ever trying to make that mainstream record?
I was trying to make a pop record, but I don't know if that pop music and chart pop or mainstream pop, I think there's a big crossover there, but I don't think they're one and the same thing necessarily. I think there's some amazing pop music that doesn't make it to being that widely recognised. I was just trying to make more pop music. Obviously you want it to be kind of successful or heard by a lot of people, but I kind of didn't. My gauge of success was based on how the songs worked as pop songs rather than how many units they shifted or what kind of chart position they got to or something like that. So I was only trying to make a mainstream record in that it was more of a pop focused record. There was more of a melodic focus to it than the first album, which had a lot of instrumental passages to it.
And it's really, really unusual for any artist to come up with an album exactly 12 months after the first these days.
Well, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, it came out about that time, but I finished Soundrive Forever about a year and a half before it came out. Right. So I'd started working on what became Culture Volume pretty much immediately then. So by the time Soundrive Forever came out in 2014, I was about halfway finished with Culture Volume anyway, so it seemed like a very quick step, but actually I worked on both records for about 2 or 3 years each.
It's that long a process. So, I mean, can you take me through, in a nutshell, what your process is? Do you start off with the bare bones of the lyrics, or do you start off by just making beats on your computer?
Lyrics are usually, or at least in this case, pretty much always been the last thing that happens. And I guess more often than not, it will come from melodic ideas. So I've got a melody, and I probably won't fill lyrics into that melodic space until the very end of the track, but it will be that melody that kind of becomes the impetus for the song, and that's where I'll build the song from that initial melodic framework, I suppose. And around that, chords fit in, and rhythms and stuff like that. But I don't feel like any two songs have a similar way of coming about, coming to realisation. They're just, that's why every song kind of sounds different to the last one, I suppose, is that because they'll grow up in very different ways.
Well, and you've got to be pleased with the reception Culture Volume's got as well, but you were nominated for the Mercury for Total Strife Forever. Did you fear at that point being the next Nitin Sawhney and, just not having another popular album after that?
No, because I'd already finished Culture Volume at that point, so it was like, well, I could worry about this, but I've already finished the next album. I mean, no one knew it at the time. No one knew that I'd finished Culture Volume. By the time the ceremony for the Mercuries came about, I think I mastered Culture Volume the week after. So it was about, everything's already in place and there's nothing I can do about it now. I've already handed it over to the record label and it's going to come out next year and there's nothing I can do about it. So I think having that sort of mentality allowed me to approach the Mercury thing with a bit more, I just enjoyed it more because it was like, it doesn't really matter what happens here, whether I win or lose, it's whatever happens next is already set in stone to some degree. So I felt very confident about it. I think it was all kind of, it makes it sound like it was some grand scheme, some grand plan now, but actually things happened coincidentally and I'm happy with the way that went.
And how do you feel about the whole process of getting this recognition from your peers? Do you think it's ever important, or is the only recognition that's important your own?
I think that your priorities change, and I'm not saying this is a good thing at all actually, but I think that the first album I made was more to please myself, and I think the success you felt from that was when I finished it, that was it. Whereas the second album, your priorities change because now all of a sudden you've got an audience. It's not just you to please. It feels like you've got to perform for other people, which is a weird thing. I'm not sure that's entirely right or the best way to do things, but it definitely does affect how you end up creating the next thing. I felt like Culture Volume had an audience in mind, whereas Soundrive Forever, everything was kind of directed inwards. So the first album was introverted, and I feel like the second album was extroverted.
A lot of people, well, me included, feel that they do their most creative work late at night because the emotions in the brain well up. You know, you've got the prefrontal cortex going crazy, whatever. I mean, do you find that you're a better writer late at night than in the middle of the day?
No. Morning is the most creative time for me, actually. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because everything's kind of still and the day's concerns haven't quite built up in the head yet, and I wonder if that's the best way to approach ideas. I don't know. I definitely feel that I'm more of a morning person anyway. I rise pretty early, and I've never been one to sort of lie in or anything. I don't know. Maybe it's changing now. No, I kind of like when I'm working on an album. I find it's useful to structure the day kind of as if you've got a 9-to-5 job. You know, I'll get up at 7 or 8, and then I'll have breakfast and have some sort of like moment where you're not focusing on the work. You know, you're just sort of easing yourself into the day, and then about 9 or 10 I'll start working, and I'll try to keep doing that, sometimes to no avail, until 5 or 6 at night, and then I'll clock off and have dinner. It
sounds like you work to a plan, but then in end result you actually say the end result was not what I intended.
Oh, well, I mean, it doesn't really matter whether the creative process is structured or not. That can still be the case, you know. You can start off with something, and no matter how structured you work on that particular idea, it will still end up completely in a different realm than you maybe originally intended it. But I think that's the exciting thing about making art altogether, really, is that things can take unexpected turns. If everything was exactly how you imagined it every time you made it, I think it would be boring.
It's interesting as well that you said that you work at your best, in your opinion, when the day's concerns are not in your head. But don't most people write about their worries and about what actually concerns them?
Well, I think my anxieties and things that maybe I draw lyrical influence from are just kind of like totally omnipresent and ubiquitous anyway. It doesn't really matter how much they stack up at the end of the day. But I feel like all my lyrical things are more there to, you know, they're more abstract than singing about how I woke up one morning and this thing happened to me. You know, it was more they're kind of trying to get to the heart of ideas that aren't entirely sort of based in this world. You know, I know it sounds incredibly waffly and pretentious, but I think I know what I'm trying to say at least.
Well, I think it's important that, I mean, actually, Pete Townsend said a great thing. He said, well, pretentious in the dictionary just means pretending to be something. So isn't that what all musicians are trying to do?
Yeah, it's a sort of construct in some sense. I have got a big problem with people who think that music's got to be this like authentic, genuine thing all the time. I don't see any problem with that. We're all performers. You know, I don't take anyone seriously. It's hard to find anyone who really does go out there and bear it all completely with no pretenses. There's at some point along the way there's a construct involved, I think, and I think it's hard to. It's kind of. It's stupid maybe to react against that, or maybe it's productive to work against that. But I think it's interesting to subvert and use it for your own good.
Sure. Thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the gig.
Yeah, cheers.
Take care.
Thank you.